The encounter. It was a typical Friday evening in the bustling city, where the sound of car engines, distant honks, and street chatter filled the air. The sun was slowly sinking behind the tall buildings, casting long shadows across the streets, signaling the end of a long work week. Judge Maya Lawson, a respected figure in the legal community, was finally heading home after another demanding day in court. Known for her sharp mind and firm stance on justice, Maya had built a reputation for being both compassionate and unyielding when it came to upholding the law. As she drove her sleek black sedan through the quiet suburban streets leading to her neighborhood, her mind wandered to thoughts of her family. Her daughter Simone had just returned from her first year at college, and they had planned a weekend filled with much-needed bonding time. The excitement of seeing Simone's face again, hearing her stories, and sharing laughs after the hectic months apart warmed Maya's heart. But that warmth was soon to be shattered. Just as Maya passed a familiar intersection, her rearview mirror lit up with the flashing red and blue lights of a police car. Her heart raced, and her thoughts snapped back to the present. She quickly ran through the mental checklist: seatbelt fastened, speed limit observed, full stop made at the intersection. She had done nothing wrong. Still, the unease that always seemed to accompany interactions with law enforcement began to creep in. She was no stranger to the reality that being a black woman, even a judge, did not exempt her from the biases and injustices that plagued society. With a deep breath, Maya pulled her car over to the side of the road, her fingers gripping the steering wheel tightly. As she waited, she glanced at the approaching officer through the side mirror. A young man with an air of arrogance in his stride, his hand casually rested on the handle of his holstered gun. He stopped beside her window, peering in as if sizing her up. "Evening, officer," Maya said, keeping her voice calm but firm. "Is there a problem?" The officer, whose name tag read D.R. McNair, didn't respond immediately. Instead, he gave her a long, scrutinizing look before speaking. "License and registration," he demanded, his tone cold and detached. Maya, familiar with the procedure, handed over her documents without hesitation. She had nothing to hide, but as McNair examined her license, his eyebrows lifted slightly. "Judge Lawson?" His tone softened, but only slightly, and his gaze shifted from her to the car she was driving. There was a moment of hesitation before he continued. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Maya met his gaze steadily, sensing the shift in his demeanor. "No, I'm not sure. Could you tell me?" McNair smirked, clearly enjoying the power he held in this situation. "You were speeding and didn't make a full stop at the intersection back there." Maya frowned, knowing she had not been speeding, and that she always stopped completely at intersections. But arguing would likely get her nowhere. She'd seen this play out too many times, even from the bench. "I see. I must have been distracted," she replied, keeping her tone as composed as possible. McNair seemed momentarily thrown by her calmness, perhaps expecting anger or resistance. His eyes roamed over the inside of her car, searching for any excuse to escalate the situation. After a brief pause, he made a decision. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered abruptly. Maya's heart skipped a beat. "Is that necessary, officer?" she asked, the tension now clear in her voice. "Step out of the vehicle now," McNair repeated, more forcefully this time. Reluctantly, Maya unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out of the car. Standing by the hood, she watched as McNair began to search her vehicle, methodically opening compartments, looking under seats, and checking the trunk. Her thoughts raced. Was this really about a minor traffic violation, or was it about something else? Was this because she was a black woman driving an expensive car? The familiar knot of injustice twisted in her stomach. Minutes passed, and McNair found nothing. He returned to her, his expression unreadable as he handed back her license and registration. "You're free to go," he muttered curtly. Maya, though relieved the ordeal was over, felt a burning anger simmering beneath her composed exterior. She had done nothing wrong, and yet she had been treated with suspicion and condescension. Her voice, still calm, but now edged with indignation, cut through the air. "Is that all, officer?" McNair avoided her gaze. "That's all," he mumbled before turning back to his cruiser. As Maya got back into her car, her hands trembled slightly. The encounter was over, but the injustice lingered. This wasn't just a routine traffic stop. It was a reminder of the systemic racism she had spent her career fighting against. It was a battle she had thought she was immune to, but tonight had proven otherwise. As she drove home, one thought dominated her mind. This wasn't over. Later that night, sitting in her living room with a cup of tea in hand, Maya replayed the events in her mind. She had managed to stay calm and professional, but inside, the experience had left her shaken. She knew that McNair's actions weren't just a personal affront, they were symptomatic of a much larger issue, one that affected countless people who didn't have her influence or her platform, people who couldn't speak out, people who were forced to endure such encounters every day. As she sat there, her thoughts heavy, Simone entered the room. Her daughter's bright, inquisitive face was a welcome sight. "Mom, are you okay?" Simone asked, noticing her mother's faraway expression. Maya looked up and smiled softly, though the weight of the night still hung over her. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just thinking about what happened earlier." Simone's brow furrowed with concern. "I heard about it. That cop. What he did was wrong. You shouldn't have to go through that. No one should." Maya nodded, her hand tightening around her cup. "You're right. But this isn't just about me. It's about so many people who go through this and worse, without anyone ever knowing. It's about a system that allows this to happen." Simone sat next to her, her voice quiet but full of resolve. "So, what are you going to do?" Maya's gaze hardened with determination. "I'm going to speak out. This can't keep happening." Simone smiled, pride swelling in her chest. She had always admired her mother's strength, but now she saw something more, something bigger. A fire had been lit, and it wasn't going to be extinguished anytime soon. The fire within. The weekend arrived with a rare silence in the Lawson household, yet beneath the calm exterior, a storm brewed within Maya. The incident with Officer McNair wasn't something she could easily shake off. It lingered, not just as a personal affront, but as a symbol of a much deeper problem. Maya had spent her career fighting for justice, meticulously navigating the intricacies of law, ensuring that fairness was upheld in every case. But now, the weight of systemic injustice had made its way to her doorstep, and she could no longer remain on the sidelines. As the sun streamed through the kitchen window, Maya stood quietly at the counter, brewing her morning coffee. Her daughter Simone was still asleep upstairs, but Maya's mind was already racing. The fire that had been ignited the night before was now blazing. She had tried to rest, but every time she closed her eyes, the image of Officer McNair's smug expression and his casual disrespect flashed in her mind. She replayed the scene over and over, thinking about how different it could have been. What if she hadn't been a judge? What if she had been someone without the legal knowledge to keep her calm? What if she had resisted, out of anger or fear, and the situation had escalated? Maya had seen the consequences of such interactions too many times in her courtroom. Lives ruined over trivial encounters, escalated by prejudice and systemic neglect. As she poured her coffee, her resolve solidified. She couldn't let this slide. She had to act, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been subjected to this type of treatment. That morning, she sat down at her kitchen table with a notebook and pen. Writing always helped her clarify her thoughts, and today, there was much to clarify. She began jotting down her ideas, starting with the complaint she would file against Officer McNair. But this wasn't going to be a simple complaint. This would be the beginning of something larger, something that could ignite change. A few hours later, as Simone descended the stairs, groggy-eyed but curious, she noticed her mother deeply engrossed in her notebook. "Mom, you're up early," Simone said, sitting across from her. Maya looked up, her face filled with determination. "Couldn't sleep. I've been thinking about what happened, and I've decided something." Simone leaned forward, sensing the weight of the moment. "What's that?" Maya took a deep breath. "I'm not going to let this go. I've spent years fighting for justice inside the courtroom, but what happened last night was a reminder that the fight doesn't end there. The system we trust to uphold the law is broken, and it's time for someone to speak out." Simone nodded, her admiration for her mother growing with every word. "But how, Mom? I mean, what can we do? It's the police we're talking about. They close ranks when one of their own is called out." Maya looked at her daughter with a confidence that came from years of standing her ground in court. "I'm going to file a formal complaint, and I'm not stopping there. I'll use every resource I have. The media, public opinion, legal channels. It's time people really see what's happening out here. Simone hesitated, clearly worried. But won't that make you a target? People might try to discredit you, especially if they know you're speaking out. Maya leaned back in her chair, understanding Simone's concerns. I know the risks, but if I don't do this, if I stay silent, then I'm no better than the system that allows this kind of behavior. And besides, this isn't just about me, Simone. It's about every black man and woman who has been stopped for no reason. Every person who doesn't have a title or a platform to speak out. Simone bit her lip, nodding slowly. I get it. And I'm with you, Mom, whatever you need. Maya smiled, grateful for the support. Thank you. I'll need all the help I can get. Later that day, Maya met with her colleague, Marcus Washington, a prominent civil rights attorney. They had worked together on cases before, but this one felt different, personal. Marcus had always admired Maya's tenacity and sense of justice, and when he heard about the incident with Officer McNair, he was immediately on board. Marcus, I need your help, Maya said as they sat in a small cafe near the courthouse. I want to file a formal complaint against McNair, but I also want to take this further. This can't just be about me. It has to be about the larger issue of racial profiling and police misconduct. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, his expression serious. I agree. What McNair did was wrong, but it's part of a much bigger problem. The police culture, the lack of accountability. It's all interconnected. If we go after this, we need to be prepared for pushback. I know, Maya replied, but I'm ready. I can't stand by and let this go. Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. We can start with the formal complaint. I'll handle the legal side. But you need to prepare for this to go public. Once the media gets wind of this, things could get messy. Maya understood the risks. She had seen public cases spiral out of control before, but she was willing to face the storm if it meant shining a light on the truth. I'm ready for whatever comes. The two spent the next few hours drafting the formal complaint, detailing every aspect of the traffic stop, from McNair's initial approach to his unlawful search of her vehicle. Maya recounted every moment with precision, knowing that this document would be the foundation of their case. Once the complaint was finalized, Marcus looked at Maya with a solemn expression. We'll submit this tomorrow. After that, it's in the hands of internal affairs, but don't expect them to be fast. These things can drag on. Maya sighed, knowing the process could be slow. I know, but I'm not going anywhere. The next week was a whirlwind of preparation and anticipation. Maya returned to her regular duties at the courthouse, but the encounter with Officer McNair weighed on her constantly. She couldn't help but notice how the officers in the building looked at her differently now, aware of the complaint she had filed. There was an air of tension, but Maya refused to let it intimidate her. Simone, sensing the gravity of the situation, had also stepped up, becoming her mother's sounding board and constant source of support. She had always been proud of Maya, but now she saw her mother in a new light, someone who wasn't just fighting for justice in the courtroom, but in the world beyond it. One afternoon, as Maya sat in her office reviewing case files, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Marcus. Subject: Internal Affairs hearing date set. Maya opened the email, her heart racing as she read the details. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. It would be her chance to present her case against Officer McNair and to demand accountability for his actions. She sat back in her chair, a mixture of relief and apprehension washing over her. The wheels of justice were beginning to turn, but there was still a long road ahead. She knew the hearing wouldn't be easy. Police departments were notoriously protective of their own. But Maya had spent her entire career preparing for moments like this. She was ready for the fight. As she closed the email, Simone appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might need this, Simone said with a smile, handing one to her mother. Maya took the cup, her hands steady despite the growing pressure. Thanks, sweetie. I'm going to need all the strength I can get. Simone sat down across from her, her eyes full of admiration. You've got this, Mom. You always do. Maya smiled, feeling the weight of her daughter's support. She took a deep breath, knowing that the road ahead would be difficult, but she wasn't walking it alone. The fire within her burned brighter than ever. This was no longer just about her experience. It was about challenging a broken system, about standing up for those who couldn't, and about ensuring that justice was truly served. The battle begins. The following week arrived in a blur of anticipation and unease. Maya stood in front of her mirror, carefully smoothing the lapels of her jacket, her face a mask of determination. This wasn't just another day at court. Today, she would face the system she had worked within for years, only this time she was no longer just a judge, but a plaintiff seeking accountability for the blatant misconduct she had experienced. Simone was already downstairs, pacing the kitchen nervously. Her support had been unwavering, but as the hearing loomed, she couldn't hide her fear. "Mom, are you sure about this?" "You know how these things go," she said, biting her lip. Maya met her daughter's gaze, offering a reassuring smile. "I know exactly how these things go, Simone. That's why I have to do this. People like McNair rely on the system protecting them, counting on the fact that most people won't push back. But I'm not most people. And this isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's ever been mistreated and ignored." Simone nodded, though her worry didn't fully fade. She admired her mother's strength, but she also knew the dangers that came with challenging authority, especially when that authority wore a badge. The fear of retaliation, of being smeared in the press, of her mother's professional reputation being torn apart, gnawed at her. But she stayed quiet, trusting that Maya knew what she was doing. The ride to the Internal Affairs office was tense. Maya's mind was a flurry of thoughts, but she remained outwardly composed, knowing that any display of doubt could weaken her resolve. She had spent years sitting on the bench, listening to cases where people's lives were on the line, and she had always prided herself on maintaining a calm, controlled demeanor. Today would be no different, even though this case was personal. As they arrived at the building, Marcus was already waiting for her outside. His sharp suit and confident posture made him seem ready for battle, and Maya was grateful to have him in her corner. "Morning, Judge." Marcus greeted her, though today the title felt less formal and more like a shield of armor they both knew she'd need. "Morning, Marcus. How's everything looking?" Maya asked, straightening her back and adopting her courtroom tone. "We're ready. I've gone over the evidence, and there's no way they can ignore the facts. The dashcam footage speaks for itself. But remember, this is still internal affairs, and they're not exactly known for swift or impartial justice," Marcus replied, his voice calm but cautious. "I know," Maya said, her voice steely, "but we'll make them listen." They entered the building together, walking down a sterile hallway lined with framed photos of police officers past and present. Maya's footsteps echoed, each step bringing her closer to the moment she had been preparing for since the incident with McNair. Simone trailed behind, watching her mother with a mixture of pride and anxiety. She had never seen Maya so focused, so resolute. They were led into a conference room where the hearing would take place. At the far end of the room, a panel of officers sat behind a large wooden table, their faces unreadable. Detective Harris, the lead investigator for Internal Affairs, stood to the side, a thick file in his hand. Across from the panel sat Officer McNair, looking noticeably less smug than he had during the traffic stop. His attorney was seated beside him, flipping through notes and preparing for what was certain to be a contentious hearing. Maya and Marcus took their seats at the opposite end of the table. As Maya glanced around the room, she could feel the weight of history pressing down on her. This was the same system that had protected officers like McNair for years. She knew the statistics, how rare it was for a police officer to face real consequences for misconduct. But today, she wasn't just another statistic. Today, she was here to disrupt the status quo. Detective Harris cleared his throat and addressed the room. "We're here today to review the formal complaint filed by Judge Maya Lawson against Officer Darren McNair for misconduct during a traffic stop on the night of June 17th. We'll be reviewing the evidence, including dashcam footage, and hearing testimony from both parties. Let's begin." The tension in the room was palpable as the lights dimmed, and the dashcam footage began to play on a large screen mounted on the wall. Maya held her breath as the video showed her car driving down the street, then the flash of McNair's lights as he pulled her over. The room watched in silence as the encounter unfolded. McNair's aggressive tone, his unwarranted demand for her to exit the vehicle, and his intrusive search of her car. Maya felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she relived the moment. She hadn't realized just how unsettling it had been until she saw it through the cold, objective lens of the camera. The footage showed everything: her calm demeanor, McNair's escalating behavior, and finally, his begrudging admission that she was free to go. When the video ended, there was a long silence in the room. Detective Harris turned to Maya. "Judge Lawson, would you like to make a statement?" Maya stood, her heart pounding but her face composed. She had spoken in courtrooms countless times, but this felt different. She wasn't just arguing a case. She was defending her right to exist in a system that often failed people like her. "Yes, I would," she began, her voice steady. "What you saw on that footage was not an isolated incident. This happens every day to countless black men and women, most of whom don't have the title or platform that I do. Officer McNair's actions were not just an abuse of power. They were a reflection of a larger problem within the system. I wasn't pulled over because I broke the law. I was pulled over because I fit a profile. Because to Officer McNair, a black woman driving a nice car at night was suspicious. That's the reality I face, that so many of us face, every single day." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for justice. I'm asking for accountability. I believe that those who enforce the law must be held to the highest standard, and Officer McNair failed that standard." When she finished, she sat down, her heart still racing. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, but she didn't waver. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to let fear or doubt take it from her. McNair's attorney stood next, launching into a defense that Maya had expected. He argued that McNair had acted within the bounds of his authority, that the traffic stop had been lawful, and that there was no evidence of racial profiling. He painted McNair as a diligent officer, simply doing his job. But the footage told a different story, and Maya knew that no matter how McNair's attorney tried to spin it, the truth was clear. The hearing continued for hours, with both sides presenting their cases. Marcus expertly cross-examined McNair, pointing out inconsistencies in his testimony and highlighting the unnecessary escalation during the stop. By the time the hearing adjourned, Maya felt a sense of cautious optimism. The evidence was in their favor, but she knew better than to assume victory too soon. As they exited the building, Simone rushed to her mother's side, her face full of hope. "Mom, you were amazing in there. I think you really got through to them." Maya smiled, though the weight of the day still clung to her. "I hope so, sweetie. But we'll have to wait and see." Marcus joined them, nodding in agreement. "You did everything right, Maya. Now it's up to them." The drive home was quiet, the tension of the hearing still hanging in the air. Maya stared out the window, her mind racing. She had fought with everything she had, but now the decision was out of her hands. The system she had spent years upholding would decide whether it was capable of holding one of its own accountable. For now, all she could do was wait. But Maya knew that no matter the outcome, this was only the beginning. The battle for justice had been ignited, and she wasn't going to let it burn out. As they pulled into the driveway, Simon reached over and took her mother's hand. "Whatever happens, I'm proud of you." Maya squeezed her daughter's hand, feeling the warmth of her support. "Thank you, Simone. No matter what, we're not done. Not by a long shot." The storm gathers. The days that followed the hearing were filled with an eerie sense of anticipation. Each passing hour felt like a ticking clock, counting down to an outcome that could change the course of Maya's life, and possibly the lives of many others. The complaint against Officer McNair had already begun to stir whispers within the city's legal circles, and the media had caught wind of it as well. It was no longer just an internal affairs issue. The public was watching, and Maya was becoming the face of a larger battle. One evening, as Maya sat in her study, reviewing court documents for the upcoming week, her phone buzzed. It was a notification from a news outlet she subscribed to, but this time it wasn't the usual legal commentary or local crime reports. This headline was different. "Respected judge files formal complaint against officer for racial profiling. Community divided." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected the media coverage to happen so soon, but in the age of digital news, stories like this spread like wildfire. Her eyes quickly scanned the article, which recounted the details of the hearing, the dashcam footage, and a brief profile of her career. The tone was neutral, but she knew how quickly the narrative could shift. What troubled her most were the comments below the article, anonymous voices, many of them hostile. She's just playing the race card. Here we go again, another overreaction. Typical. She's a judge. She should know better than to make a fuss over a simple traffic stop. Maya let out a frustrated sigh and closed the article. She had expected backlash, but seeing it in print still stung. These people didn't know her, didn't understand the gravity of what had happened, or the larger implications of police misconduct. They weren't thinking about the black men and women who didn't have her resources or her platform, who faced even worse harassment without any recourse. For them, this was just another case of overreacting. But this wasn't just about her, and it never had been. Just as she was about to turn off her computer, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Marcus. She answered immediately, glad to have someone who understood what she was going through. "Hey, Maya," Marcus began, his voice steady but cautious. "I'm guessing you saw the article." "I did," Maya replied, leaning back in her chair. "It was only a matter of time before the media got involved." Marcus sighed. "Yeah, and the comments aren't exactly favorable. But we knew this would happen. This is the part where people start picking sides." Maya rubbed her temple, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on her. "I expected pushback, but it still gets to me, you know? They're acting like I'm blowing this out of proportion, like this is just some minor inconvenience." "It's easier for them to believe that," Marcus said. "Acknowledging the truth means they'd have to confront the system they trust. And most people don't want to do that. They want to believe the police are always in the right." Maya nodded, knowing he was right. "I just hope we can make them see the bigger picture." "We will," Marcus reassured her. "But there's something else you need to know. I've been getting calls. A few reporters want to interview you. They want your side of the story." Maya's pulse quickened. She had always been a private person, even as a public figure in the courtroom. The idea of going on record with her personal experience was daunting, but she knew this was bigger than her discomfort. If she didn't tell her story, someone else would, and they might not get it right. "I'll do it," Maya said after a long pause. "But I need to control the narrative. I won't let them twist this into something it's not." "Of course," Marcus agreed. "We'll take it slow. I'll help you prep. Make sure you're ready. We can use this to turn the tide in our favor." The next morning, Maya sat at the kitchen table with Simone, the tension from the night before still lingering in the air. Simone had also seen the article and the flood of comments that followed. It was all over social media, and Simone, though fiercely protective of her mother, couldn't help but feel the weight of the public's judgment. "Mom, I know you're strong, but this is getting intense," Simone said, scrolling through her phone with a frown. "People are being so cruel." Maya glanced at her daughter's phone, seeing the vitriol on display. That's what happens when people are faced with uncomfortable truths. They lash out because it's easier than acknowledging what's really happening. Simone sighed, placing her phone face down on the table. "I know, but it still sucks. You don't deserve this." Maya smiled softly, reaching across the table to squeeze Simone's hand. "I've been through worse, trust me, and I knew what I was getting into when I filed that complaint. The important thing is that we don't let this discourage us. If I give up now, what kind of example am I setting? For you, for others who might be watching." Simone nodded, though the worry in her eyes hadn't faded. "I just hate seeing them tear you down. You're doing something good, something important." "I know," Maya said, her voice firm. "And that's why we keep pushing. I'm not backing down." As they finished breakfast, Maya's phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from one of the news outlets that had requested an interview. They wanted to run a piece that focused not just on the traffic stop, but on Maya's career and her broader fight for justice. It was the perfect opportunity to shift the narrative, to take control of the story before it spiraled out of control. She agreed to the interview, knowing that it would be her chance to speak directly to the people who had so easily dismissed her experience. But she would have to be careful. Every word would be scrutinized, every statement dissected. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the message she was sending to an entire community. 2 days later, the interview was set. Maya sat in a sleek downtown studio, the bright lights and cameras focused on her. Across from her was the reporter, a woman named Naomi Reed, who had a reputation for fair and thoughtful journalism. Maya had chosen her carefully, wanting someone who would approach the story with care and integrity. Naomi began the interview with the usual pleasantries, asking Maya about her background, her journey to becoming a judge, and her reputation as a strong advocate for justice. Maya answered confidently, keeping her responses measured and professional. But then the questions turned to the incident with Officer McNair. Judge Lawson, you filed a formal complaint against Officer Darren McNair, accusing him of racial profiling and misconduct during a routine traffic stop. Could you walk us through what happened that night and why you felt compelled to take this step? Maya took a deep breath, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had rehearsed this with Marcus, but now that the moment was here, the weight of it felt heavier than she expected. It was a routine traffic stop, but the way Officer McNair handled it was anything but routine, she began. From the moment he approached my car, his behavior was aggressive and dismissive. He accused me of speeding and running a stop sign, neither of which I had done. When I explained that I had done nothing wrong, he demanded that I step out of the vehicle and search my car without cause. Naomi nodded, listening intently. And do you believe this treatment was because of your race? Maya's gaze didn't waver. Absolutely. I've been a judge for over a decade, and I know the law. I know my rights. But that night, I wasn't treated like a respected legal professional. I wasn't treated like someone who had committed a minor traffic violation. I was treated like a suspect, simply because I was a black woman driving a nice car at night. And that's not just a personal grievance. That's a systemic issue. Naomi leaned forward slightly. So what do you hope to achieve with this complaint? What changes are you looking for? I want accountability, Maya said firmly, not just for Officer McNair, but for the entire system that allows this kind of behavior to go unchecked. Police officers are entrusted with incredible power, and with that power comes responsibility. They should be held to the highest standards. If we allow them to treat people like this, especially people of color, without consequences, then we are complicit in perpetuating injustice. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, with Maya laying out her case clearly and thoughtfully. By the time it was over, she felt a sense of relief. She had said what needed to be said, and now the public would hear her side of the story in her own words. The next morning, the interview aired, and the response was immediate. Social media lit up with reactions, many of them supportive, as people rallied behind Maya's call for justice. The tides were beginning to turn, and the narrative was shifting in her favor. But along with the support came the inevitable backlash. People accusing her of seeking attention, of trying to stir up controversy where there was none. Maya knew this would happen. She had been prepared for it. But now, with the public watching, and the internal affairs decision still looming, the stakes felt higher than ever. This was no longer just a personal battle. It was a fight for the soul of a system that had long been broken. As the storm gathered around her, Maya stood resolute. She had spent her career defending the law, but now she was fighting for something much bigger, justice, not just for herself, but for an entire community that had been silenced for far too long. The power of voice. The days after the interview aired were a whirlwind. The feedback poured in from all corners, some praising Maya for her courage, while others were quick to criticize. The media coverage continued to expand, and Maya found herself at the center of a larger conversation about race, policing, and justice in America. Every headline that included her name felt like another step into the public eye, a spotlight she had never sought, but now couldn't avoid. Simone watched the chaos unfold with a mixture of pride and fear. She had always known her mother to be strong, but now she saw that strength being tested in ways she hadn't imagined. As much as she admired Maya for standing up, Simone couldn't shake the unease that had settled in the pit of her stomach. It was a Friday afternoon when Simone finally voiced her concerns. They were sitting together in the living room, the soft hum of the news playing in the background. The story about Maya's battle with the police department was everywhere, and it seemed like every channel had a different angle. Simone turned to her mother, her voice hesitant but firm. "Mom, I'm worried," Simone began, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of a throw pillow. "I know you're doing the right thing, but this is getting so big. People are talking about you like you're some kind of symbol. What if this gets out of control?" Maya looked at her daughter, sensing the weight of her worry. She had noticed the strain in Simon's voice in recent days, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She knew that this fight wasn't just affecting her, it was affecting everyone around her, especially her daughter. I understand, Simone, Maya said softly, reaching out to place a reassuring hand on her daughter's knee. This is bigger than I ever expected, and I'm not going to pretend that I'm not scared sometimes. But I also know that if we don't speak up, nothing changes. What happened to me wasn't just about a traffic stop. It was about a system that has been allowed to operate without accountability for far too long. Simone sighed, leaning back into the couch. But what about you, Mom? I'm scared for you. I've seen the threats online, the comments. People are angry, and some of them are dangerous. What if someone tries to hurt you? Maya's face softened as she saw the fear in her daughter's eyes. I won't lie to you, Simone. There are risks, but I'm not alone in this. I have support. Marcus, the media, even people I've never met are standing with us. And most importantly, I have you. Simone's eyes welled up with tears. But I don't want to lose you to this fight. Maya pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, her own emotions threatening to spill over. You won't lose me, sweetie. I promise. But this fight is for you too. It's for your future, for the world I want you to live in. A world where you don't have to be afraid every time you get behind the wheel, where you don't have to worry about being judged for the color of your skin. Simone clung to her mother, her tears falling freely now. She had always looked up to Maya as her hero, but seeing her like this, vulnerable, yet determined, made Simone realize just how much her mother was sacrificing for a cause bigger than both of them. The next week, the media attention on Maya's case only intensified. Marcus had warned her that this was likely to happen, but nothing could have prepared her for the sheer magnitude of it. News outlets were now calling it the Lawson case, and pundits debated it nightly on television. Everyone had an opinion, and Maya's face became a symbol of both justice and controversy. The public response was polarizing. Many rallied behind her, seeing her as a voice for the voiceless, a symbol of strength in the face of systemic injustice. Community leaders and activists began to reach out, wanting to align their efforts with hers. But the backlash was just as loud, if not louder. Police unions condemned her, claiming she was vilifying law enforcement and undermining public trust. Social media was a battleground of insults, accusations, and veiled threats. Maya received phone calls, some supportive, some vile. At first, she tried to ignore the negativity, but it became harder to shut out the hate. Anonymous emails, filled with slurs and threats, started flooding her inbox. Strangers sent her letters telling her to stop causing trouble, to know her place. The ugliness of it all weighed on her, but Maya refused to be silenced. One evening, as she sat at her kitchen table, she received a call from an unexpected ally, Reverend Sarah Hughes, a prominent civil rights leader and pastor in the community, had been following Maya's case closely. The Reverend's voice was warm and full of conviction as she spoke. Judge Lawson, I've been watching your fight from the sidelines, and I just want to say how proud I am of what you're doing, Reverend Hughes said. You're not just standing up for yourself, you're standing up for all of us. We've been waiting for someone to take this fight head on, and I want you to know that we've got your back. Maya was deeply moved by the Reverend's words. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of community, of solidarity. She wasn't alone in this fight. Thank you, Reverend. That means more than you know. Some days, it feels like the weight of the world is on my shoulders, but hearing from people like you, it makes me feel like I can keep going. You can, and you will, Reverend Hughes said, her voice full of warmth. We're organizing a rally next week to show our support for you and for the fight against police brutality and racial profiling. I want you to speak at the rally, if you're willing. Maya hesitated. The idea of speaking in front of hundreds, maybe thousands of people was daunting. She had always been comfortable in the courtroom, where the rules were clear and the setting controlled. But a rally? That was a different kind of stage, a public stage with all eyes on her. I'm honored, Reverend, but are you sure I'm the right person for this? I'm just one woman. I don't know if I'm ready to be the face of this movement. You don't have to be the face, Judge, Reverend Hughes said gently. But your voice carries weight. People listen to you. And right now, we need your voice. We need to show the world that we won't stand by and let injustice continue. Maya thought about it for a long moment. She had never set out to be a leader of a movement. She was a judge, a woman who had spent her life working within the system to change it. But now the system was fighting back, and if she didn't step up, who would? If she didn't use her voice, her platform, to make a difference, what was all of this for? "I'll do it," Maya finally said, her voice steady. "I'll speak at the rally." The day of the rally arrived with a sense of anticipation that hung thick in the air. Hundreds of people gathered in the park, their signs raised high, their voices united in a call for justice. Maya stood behind the stage, watching the crowd from a distance. Simone was by her side, squeezing her hand for reassurance. Marcus stood on the other side, offering quiet support. "You ready for this?" Marcus asked, his tone light but serious. Maya took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." The sound of the crowd chanting for justice filled her ears as she stepped onto the stage. The sea of faces looked up at her, expectant, hopeful. She felt a wave of nerves wash over her, but then she remembered why she was here. This wasn't just about her. This was about all the people who didn't have a platform, who couldn't speak out, who had been silenced for too long. Maya stepped up to the microphone, her voice clear and strong. "Thank you, Reverend Hughes, and thank you to everyone here today. I'm standing here not just as a judge, not just as a black woman who experienced injustice, but as someone who believes that we all deserve better." The crowd erupted in applause, but Maya held up a hand, signaling for quiet. "What happened to me wasn't unique. It wasn't an isolated incident. It happens every day, in cities and towns across this country. It happens to people without titles, without platforms, without a way to fight back. But we are here today to say that enough is enough. We won't be silent. We won't be ignored." Her voice grew stronger, fueled by the energy of the crowd. This isn't just about one bad cop or one broken system. This is about a society that has allowed injustice to thrive in plain sight. But we're here today because we believe that change is possible. We're here because we refuse to accept the status quo. And together, we are going to make a difference. The crowd roared in response, their cheers echoing through the park. Maya felt a surge of emotion as she looked out at the faces of people who believed in her, who believed in the fight for justice. This was more than she had ever imagined, but it was exactly where she needed to be. As the rally continued, Maya stepped back from the microphone, her heart racing with a mixture of exhilaration and relief. Simone rushed to her side, her eyes wide with pride. "You were amazing, Mom," Simone said, wrapping her arms around her. Maya smiled, feeling the warmth of her daughter's embrace. "Thank you, sweetie. I couldn't have done it without you." Marcus joined them, clapping Maya on the back. "You did it, Maya. You turned this into something bigger than just a complaint. You turned it into a movement." Maya nodded, feeling the weight of those words. The battle for justice wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt like she wasn't fighting it alone. As the sun set over the park, casting a golden light over the crowd, Maya realized that the power of her voice was stronger than she had ever known, and she was ready to keep using it, no matter what came next. The turning point. The days following the rally marked a shift. Something had changed, not only in the public's perception of Maya, but also in the way Maya viewed herself. She had gone from being a quiet warrior within the confines of her courtroom to becoming a symbol of resilience, courage, and change. The rally had been a powerful moment, a declaration that she would not be silenced, and the community's response had been overwhelming. Support flooded in from civil rights organizations, legal advocates, and even fellow judges who had once hesitated to speak up. But as the praise and solidarity grew, so did the backlash. The threats became more frequent, more personal. The police union released a scathing statement condemning her actions, accusing her of endangering officers and promoting an anti-law enforcement agenda. Anonymous emails and phone calls escalated, some warning her to stop, others spewing vile, racially charged slurs. Maya knew this was part of the cost of standing up, but the threats didn't shake her. They only solidified her resolve. She couldn't back down now, not when so many were watching, waiting to see if she would falter, if she would cave under pressure. One afternoon, as Maya was preparing for another day in court, her phone rang. It was Marcus, and his voice held an edge of urgency that immediately put her on alert. "Maya, I just got word from Internal Affairs. They're about to release their decision on McNair." Maya's heart skipped a beat. The moment she had been waiting for was finally here. After months of fighting, of putting herself in the public eye, this was the turning point. "What are they saying?" she asked, her voice steady but tight with anticipation. "They want to meet with you first, in private. The official announcement will come after. It's unusual, but they're giving us a heads up." Maya clenched her jaw. This wasn't standard procedure, and she didn't like the sound of it. "Do they think this will go away if they talk to me privately first?" "I don't know," Marcus said. "But we need to be prepared for anything. This could go either way." Maya nodded, even though Marcus couldn't see her. "Okay, when's the meeting?" "They want to meet today. 2 hours from now." The drive to the Internal Affairs office felt different this time. The tension that had followed Maya the last few months was heavier now, more palpable. She sat in the passenger seat, with Marcus driving in silence beside her. She could see the worry etched on his face, but he didn't say anything. The weight of what was about to happen spoke louder than words. When they arrived at the building, Maya took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. She had prepared for every possible outcome, but now that the moment was here, the uncertainty gnawed at her. Still, she walked into the office with her head held high, her shoulders squared, determined to face whatever awaited her. They were led into a small, dimly lit conference room, where two high-ranking members of the Internal Affairs Division sat waiting. Detective Harris, the man who had led the investigation, was there, along with a woman Maya recognized as Captain Wright, one of the highest-ranking officers in the department. "Judge Lawson, Mr. Washington, thank you for coming," Captain Wright said, her tone formal but guarded. "We've concluded our investigation into the complaint you filed against Officer Darren McNair." Maya's heart pounded in her chest as she took a seat across from them. Marcus sat beside her, his presence a steadying force. Detective Harris cleared his throat before speaking. After reviewing the dashcam footage, conducting interviews with all parties involved, and evaluating the evidence, Internal Affairs has determined that Officer McNair's actions were inappropriate and a violation of departmental policy. A wave of relief washed over Maya, but she held it back, knowing there was more to come. However, Harris continued, his eyes flicking briefly toward Captain Wright. "We've also determined that his actions do not rise to the level of criminal misconduct. Officer McNair will face internal disciplinary measures, including a suspension without pay and mandatory retraining." Maya's relief quickly turned to frustration. A suspension? After everything, after months of public scrutiny, the threats, the emotional toll, this was the consequence. A few weeks without pay and some retraining? It wasn't enough. It wasn't justice, not for her, and not for the countless others who had experienced the same kind of treatment without the platform to fight back. Captain Wright spoke again, her voice attempting to strike a balance between firm and conciliatory. "We understand this may not be the outcome you were hoping for, Judge Lawson, but Officer McNair will be held accountable within the department, and we believe this is a fair resolution given the circumstances." Maya clenched her fists under the table, her mind racing. "With all due respect, Captain, how is this a fair resolution? This isn't just about what happened to me. It's about a pattern of behavior, about systemic issues within the department that allow officers like McNair to act with impunity. A suspension and retraining won't fix that." Captain Wright's face hardened slightly. "We believe this is a step toward addressing those issues. Officer McNair will be monitored, and the department is committed to making improvements to our policies." Marcus, sensing Maya's rising frustration, leaned forward. "Judge Lawson has been fighting for more than just a personal victory here. She's been fighting for systemic change. A slap on the wrist for McNair isn't going to fix a system that's been broken for years." Harris looked uncomfortable, glancing down at the file in front of him. "We understand the broader concerns, and we're taking them seriously. This is not the end of the conversation, but this is the decision we've made regarding Officer McNair's conduct in this specific incident." Maya felt a wave of anger rise within her, but she kept it in check. She had fought too hard to lose her composure now. "I see," she said, her voice cool. "I appreciate the investigation, but let me be clear. This fight isn't over. I'm not going to let this issue die quietly because of a token disciplinary action. The community deserves better. This department can do better." Captain Wright's expression remained neutral, though Maya could see a flicker of discomfort in her eyes. We understand your position, Judge Lawson, and we encourage you to continue working with us to improve our policies. But this is the decision we've reached. Maya nodded once, standing up. Thank you for your time. As Maya and Marcus left the building, the weight of the decision settled over her like a heavy cloak. They had won a small victory, but it wasn't enough. The system had once again protected its own, offering just enough of a concession to avoid public outcry, but not enough to make real change. And Maya knew that this was exactly what the system was designed to do, offer just enough, but never enough to dismantle the structures that kept it in place. Suspension, Maya muttered under her breath as they reached the car. That's all they're giving him. Marcus sighed, leaning against the hood of the car. It's not surprising, Maya. They were never going to fully throw him under the bus, but you forced them to acknowledge that something's wrong. That's a start. Maya crossed her arms, her face set in a hard line. It's not enough. Not even close. No, it's not, Marcus agreed. But this isn't the end. You've got people listening now, paying attention. You've made this into something bigger than just a traffic stop, and that's power. Maya exhaled slowly, knowing he was right. She had always known that real change wouldn't come quickly, but the glimmer of hope she had felt after the rally was now dimmed by the reality of how deeply entrenched the system was. When she got home that evening, Simon was waiting for her in the living room, her face full of nervous anticipation. How did it go? Maya shook her head. Suspension, retraining, that's it. Simon's face fell. That's all. After everything? That's all, Maya said quietly. She sank into the couch, feeling the exhaustion of the last few months finally catch up with her. Simone sat beside her, silent for a moment, before speaking again. But you're not giving up, right? Maya looked at her daughter, the fire slowly reigniting inside her. No, I'm not giving up. This is just the beginning. The system may be slow to change, but that doesn't mean we stop pushing. If we don't keep fighting, nothing will ever change. Simone smiled, her eyes full of admiration. You're amazing, Mom. You're doing something incredible, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. Maya reached out and pulled her daughter into a hug. Thank you, sweetie. I wish it was easier. I wish change didn't have to come at such a cost. The weeks that followed were filled with a new kind of energy. Maya had become more than just a judge fighting her own battle. She had become a voice for the community, for those who had been silenced by fear and frustration. The movement that had started with her complaint was growing, and while Officer McNair's punishment had been a disappointment, the fight for justice was far from over. Maya began working with civil rights organizations, pushing for reforms in the police department. She used her platform to speak at more rallies, to write op-eds in major newspapers, to demand real accountability and transparency in law enforcement. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for all the people who had been failed by a system designed to protect itself. The threats didn't stop, but neither did the support. People from all walks of life began reaching out to her, sharing their own stories of injustice, their own encounters with systemic racism. And through it all, Maya found a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just a judge anymore. She was an advocate, a fighter, a leader. The fire within her burned brighter than ever. She knew the road ahead would be long, but she was ready. This was the fight of her life, and she wasn't going to stop until real change came. As Maya sat at her desk one evening, reviewing her notes for an upcoming meeting with city officials, Simon walked in, holding a cup of tea. I thought you might need this, she said, placing the cup on the desk with a smile. Maya looked up at her daughter, feeling a surge of pride and gratitude. Thanks, sweetie, I do. Simone sat down across from her, watching her mother work. You're going to change things, Mom. I know you are. Maya smiled softly. I hope so, Simone. I really hope so. And as she sipped her tea, the weight of the fight still heavy on her shoulders, Maya knew that no matter how long it took, she was ready. The battle wasn't over. It was only just beginning.